What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the FN story. This is somewhat of a unique take, not a Fortnite player or coach, but someone that I think will be super valuable to hear from, especially for a lot of you guys that are trying to figure out how to navigate within the space. This is Justin Jacobson. He is a lawyer who covers a lot of fields, but one in particularly is esports law and content creators. So, Justin, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. And just in case you guys don't know, Justin has his own podcast. I was actually a guest on that one, so you could definitely check that out as well. But would love to dive right in and kind of talk about like what got you into esports law, because I feel like that's probably not something you study at school, and then this is something you had to seek out.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of started in the more traditional entertainment, sports, and music world, working with pro athletes, musicians, and DJs and fashion designers. I've always been a lifelong gamer, and about 8 years ago, I kind of really noticed what was going on in esports. I'm a big StarCraft and StarCraft 2 fan, so I always knew how big it was in, South Korea and Asia. But it wasn't until about then that I really saw how huge it was getting here in North America and kind of the direction it was going. And I just kind of like looked at the space, looked at some of the other attorneys that were doing stuff at a high level, and I really just noticed they were all very similar. So I felt coming from a different background, a different skill set, connections, and being here in New York, I had something unique to bring to the table. And from there, I just kind of began working with agents on behalf of their players, doing their deals, and then eventually working with players and coaches and casters and everyone directly. And just from there, I've just been kind of doing that and helping with contracts and copyrights and trademarks and visas and LLCs and just all of the things that are necessary to operate in this entertainment space.
That's cool. So what would you say like percentage of what you do is like esports gaming content related versus everything else?
I would say most of it, but then again, what I've really kind of found is being able to sit on like the intersection of music and sports and gaming and esports and really work with, some athletes in the gaming space, some musicians in it, and really either help them build or grow. So it's really nice that there's just so many similarities and hybrids where, you know, I'm working on things that kind of straddle both worlds. But then again, I still have my music clients and, then some athletes that I work with and stuff like that.
Yeah, and even more so recently. I mean, we've seen a few pro football players, Sean Jackson, Preston Smith, created, I think it's Hall of Fame gaming, and then there's Soul Runner gaming with Tyreek Hill. There's another one I can't remember.
Rise from Roger Saffold.
There you go. There's a lot of pro athletes starting to get involved, and there's even like, I mean, both you and I are Jets fans. We are just talking about it. Sauce Gardner streams a good bit,
Yeah.
loves to do his GTA RPs and throw up the streams, have some fun, and just play video games. So it's now more relevant than ever because previously pro athletes, I feel like, didn't really care for games, but now they're growing up in like the age of the internet and video games, and it's just part of life at this point. So it's cool to see.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think related to that, I always knew that some of them played in the locker room and stuff, but it wasn't until more recently that they really kind of like put it out there. Like, I definitely heard of some intense Madden and, these kind of things over time in the locker rooms. But now with, obviously the internet and Twitch and being able to really share it and the cultural stigma is no longer associated with it, it's, kind of front and center and, I love it.
I do too. I'm so glad to be able to call this a job. It is actually unbelievable. All right. Would love to learn more about, so in my space, I'm an independent contractor. I pretty much work solely on contract bases. Sometimes I'll send out my own contract, and other times I will get a contract, and sometimes I'll get a quote unquote contract from people, which is like a Word document that's 8 lines long. I would love to know like what constitutes a legal binding agreement, right? Because a lot of times in esports, or at least within the Fortnite space, I've seen tons of people get signed and then their contract comes out and it's like a notepad off someone's computer that they're like, yep, this guy owes me $10 million, and then it's just not real. But I would love just to understand and to share with people like what constitutes something that's legally binding versus just like a written statement on a Word document.
I mean, I think that's a really interesting point because, this question is brought up where it's like, in order for a contract to exist, you got to have an offer, an acceptance, and consideration. So there has to be an offer of something. So I'm going to give you X amount to do this or to give me this, whatever it is. I'm going to give you $100 to cast this event. And then if you accept it by saying, yes, I will do this, or if you perform and they give you the money and you take the money, this is, you accepting their offer. And then the consideration is the money that's kind of paid for it. So in theory, you technically have an agreement once you have some kind of material terms of what the fee is, what you're doing, what the obligations are, like maybe a date and time. When there's enough specific and specificity, kind of what they look at, then you have a contract. However, like you said, there's between a 10, 15, 20 page contract that covers everything versus, a 3 page or like a 2 line thing that's like, we're going to give you money, do this, this, this. And it's like, in theory, if you sign it and you're over 18 and, a gun isn't held to your head or something, like it's going to be enforceable. And it's probably not going to be a good contract, and it's probably not going to address a lot of things that it should or that it could or that will protect you. But it is a contract and it is enforceable in theory, especially if they give you the money and you do what you're supposed to. It's like that's kind of the basis of it.
Interesting. So it is technically something that could be covered, but at the same time, it's if it's so basic, there's a lot of ways I would imagine that it is arguable one way or another, right?
Well, it's just also it doesn't help you. It doesn't usually benefit you. You know what I mean? It's usually like there's certain things that you're looking for that you wish you had in there to protect you. Where if it's like, ownership over it or a non-compete or exclusivity or any of these things that restrict you, if it's not addressed in there, it becomes, very muddled. So it's one of those things where I always tell people, it's like, oh, don't tell me you have a 2, 3 page agreement. Tell me you have a 20, 30 page agreement. Because at least I know everything that really needs to be in there is in there. Like if I get like a 1 or 2 page agreement and it's like a real complex thing, it's like this is just, there's just too many important factors, too many variables, so many things you have to worry about and be aware of for this to be, workable. And, I think that's the thing you realize as you're working with bigger companies, bigger entities, and going up the chain and doing bigger deals that are for more money and longer term, the agreements get longer as they should because there's a lot more at stake here. Like a small thing where they're paying you $100 to do a 2 hour thing, they give you the money, you do it, and that's it. Okay, that's pretty simple. Then you got the money, you did the thing, keep it moving. But if it's more elaborate or over a certain period of time, or you have to do a certain amount of posts or go to, meetings and pre-sessions, all the stuff
Right.
that they build into the contract that they don't pay you for, but you're expected to be there and it's like part of the job. And if you don't show up to the pre-conference meeting about the run of show, you're gonna have a problem. But they're not gonna pay you extra for that, right? Like so it's one of these things where why shouldn't you get paid an hour if you have to go on a random day and go into the studio so these are the things that you start thinking about and trying to build into your contract.
Yeah, I mean, those things. I've luckily been treated very well. I've had one poor experience and never not gotten paid for work that I've done. So, like, knock on wood, I've been quite lucky within this space because I've heard like nightmares about different
Yes,
things and
exactly.
people constantly trying to chase down money that they're owed for work that's been done. And I mean, I know a couple people that are currently trying to chase several figures worth of money that they're
And in my way, I love chasing
owed.
money.
But as far as you talked about, there should be certain pieces to protect yourself in there. Like, what are some of the clauses or pieces within a contract for, caster like myself, a content creator, an esports player? Like, what are some things that people should look out for in order to be able to protect themselves?
Well, obviously every agreement's different, but I think there's certain things you can really kind of focus on. Obviously, the term or the length of the agreement. Is it a one-off thing? Is it several months? Is it several, um, you know, events, tournaments, etc.? Are there options to continue? Obviously, if you're signing with a team, it might be beneficial to get a second option in there for a guaranteed increase in salary. So it's like you have that in there, whether or not you're going to stay there or whatnot. You at least know it's there. So being aware of how that stuff is structured and who can execute it is really important. Also, kind of how, maybe prize money or salary might be paid. Obviously, certain leagues have minimum salaries, but you want to make sure you get it and understanding how it's paid, what to do if it's late, are there late fees? When do you have to give them notice? How long do they have to cure? And I know something you probably know is maybe how the payment comes, especially for a gig. Is it like half on signing and half when you do it? Or is it wait until you do the event? Or is it 30 days after the date? Or is it net 30 or net? So it's like there's so many variables beyond what you're getting paid, how you're getting paid, right? And it's really important. It's really great if you can get half when you sign the contract and half a week before. That would be wonderful.
Oh yeah.
But usually, if you're lucky, maybe you'll get some on signing. But most of the time, exactly, you'll have to do the gig, then they'll invoice you, and then it'll be net 30 or net 60, whatever the corporate policy is. And, you know, hopefully you get that,
Yeah.
and that's important, right? And I think beyond that, looking at how the non-compete is structured. Obviously, if you're working with a brand or a company or doing an event, they might not necessarily want you working for a rival the next day or doing another event. So how that's structured, how long that goes for, that's really important. Or maybe it doesn't exist, where it's like you can work for DreamHack one day and ESL the next, and Blast after that, and we play and any other organizer across the world in any game you want. Or maybe it's like you can't do another Fortnite stream for 3 months. Like you can't be a caster for, if you're going to do a year with us, you can't then go to the rival and do their game. Or maybe you can. So these are really important things to be aware of because they'll obviously impact you on, what your future is. So again, same with brands. If you do, a deal with Coke, they're not going to want you a month later to then start pushing Pepsi everywhere. It's going to be weird. It's not, you need to have sometimes this kind of non-compete after where you're not going to work with a rival company and or any company that they directly compete with. So there's all of these things are really important to be aware of and stuff that you should focus on.
Yeah, that's
You know,
something I luckily haven't run into, but I did see recently that I think it was Blast and ESL were kind of starting to put that into their contracts as far,
uh,
maybe not into their contracts, but in practice, if you were working with one, you weren't working with the other, which is quite unfortunate. And I think that I want to say it's either Dota or Counter Strike, one of the two. I don't remember. Maybe Rainbow Six. No, it was Rainbow Six. Sorry. Essentially, it was something along the lines of like, if you were hired for, let's say, the Blast event, I don't know which one was doing which. It was one sided, so I'm probably gonna get this wrong. Let's not use names. But if you were working with one company, the other company wasn't going to hire you for the same event, even if you were considered like the top of the line caster
even
in
though
that
even if they
space.
should have.
Yes. um, which is also a strange thing. Like, I don't know that many people understand how casting works, but it, as much as it is being good at your job, a lot of it's political and like who you know and what all goes on behind the scenes, who they want to appear on a screen based on certain things. So it is very interesting the way those decisions are made, should I say.
Yes, definitely the people that are in charge of those decisions have a lot of factors that go into it. It's obviously social media numbers are a factor, but as we know, they're solely definitely not. There are probably some people there whose numbers might not echo the magnitude of the stage they're on.
Now there's one thing that I've been seeing, not particularly in things that I've worked on, but being brought up, and you're also in the entertainment space, so like this was a huge piece with the whole AI and using your likeness in perpetuity. And at first, I'm sure I probably signed a contract or two that said people could use my name, likeness, whatever, however long they want. Now I understand that, and they could use it in connection to the event that I am working, and that is what I keep it as. But that's also something people need to be aware of, because if you don't cut off the ability of a company to use your image, likeness, whatever you've done for that company in connection to an event or a term, you're going to run into issues where it could be 5 years down the line. You're going to see your ad, like, say, I blow up, I'm now a 200,000 follower person somewhere, whatsoever, whatever. Now they're gonna be like, all right, we could use all of his stuff he did for us because he's a big name and
It's
he
way more
agreed to it.
valuable.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's kind of another point you bring up, kind of the ownership of what you're creating for them, as well as how they can use your name, image, and likeness, which is your legal name, your gamer tag, your logo, your signature, your voice, anything that's identifiable by you. So if you have an amazing call and they start using it on all these clips, like you might want to have some residual royalty or some ability to control this, or they might just be like, no, we own everything, it's all part of the recording, and that's what it is. So these are the things to be aware of, and like you said, restricting it to solely for that one time, maybe having a time frame where it's like, okay, this, you can use this for 3 years. After 3 years, you either have to pull it or you have to repay me to renew it. So there's lots of creative things you can do depending on the level of what you're doing and what your leverage is. So I think that's really important, like you said, to understand how they can use it when the deal is done.
yeah, that's a good point. And I like the term what your leverage is too, because you don't always have leverage in a negotiation. Um, so sometimes you do need to pull out of things, even though it may be favorable to you, just because they're essentially trying to fuck you is like the best way to put it.
Right? They sometimes say the best deal is the one you don't take. Like, and I had this conversation yesterday where it was like, there's some times when I read an agreement, I'm like, you can't sign this. Like, this is a horrible deal. Like it's just like you're doing too much editing. If they're not going to step, like, it's just not what you want. And sometimes, like you said, it's hard to pass up on the money. It's hard to pass up on, yeah, I'm true, and you don't know when the next one's coming. But if you sign a bad deal that really jams you up, it could really jam you up. And you just have to know what your worth is. And sometimes, again, the best deal is the one that you don't sign. And sometimes it's really hard. And sometimes there are clients that don't listen to me and they sign a deal and they come back like, oh, I wish I didn't do that. And then you have the other side where I've had ones that are like, oh, thank you for making me not sign that deal. Someone else signed and they got so screwed. And if I had signed it, I would have been screwed too. And it's like, yeah, well, my job is to get a deal done. I'm a deal maker, not a deal breaker, but some deals you just can't take.
Yeah.
And that's my job to, not always tell you what you want to hear, but to tell you the truth and to protect you sometimes from yourself.
Now, as far as like, I know a lot of players like to listen to this, but say they're looking at a contract for the first time. Um, Most times, if it's for the first time, it's very little value. But what would you say is kind of the best steps? I would imagine you'd say reach out to yourself, but say you're not going to do that right away. Like, what do you think would be some like advisable options?
Well, advice, get a lawyer, get someone, someone that can help you if you don't understand it. And I think ultimately you should not sign something you don't understand or you don't feel comfortable with. I don't care what the cost is, how small the scale is. Again, if it's we're gonna give you $100 to do one thing that doesn't really have a long-term effect, okay, maybe that's a little different. But if you're signing something that's elaborate, something that's very broad, like something that just doesn't feel right, you have to trust your gut. And I think the cost that you might think, it might not be as much as you think. Like to get someone to be like, hey, can you just look at this and just like tell me if you think it's a good deal, or not even really just to negotiate it. Because honestly, two, 300, whatever it is, couple dollars that you're gonna spend to get that opinion, not even to have them negotiate it and redline it, just to be like, let me check it out, let me tell you my opinion, and if you want me to do a deeper dive, we could figure that out. But like, is this a shitty like, is this gonna really be a problem, especially if you don't understand it? And ultimately beyond that, there's volunteer lawyers for the arts. There's definitely people that are willing to kind of just help look at agreements, pro bono, and some people are willing to grow, that they want to just do the work, get the flow going, and grow with you. So I think that's always a component, but you really just have to, read it. And then I always say you can try to engage in some sort of negotiation, because these things isn't take it or leave it, but it has to be reasonable. If something is in there and like you said, it really don't want them to be able to use my name and likeness in perpetuity. I really just want to limit it to this broadcast, as well as promotional and archival value. Like you can say, we've had casters such as somebody, SBG on our cast. We're not gonna be able to continuously say he's with us, but we can't erase it from history. So okay, that might be a reasonable restriction, and then it's worth you proposing it. Or I always say, give me the Microsoft Word document and redline stuff in, and just send it over. The worst they're going to say is no. I've never been in a situation, and I've never heard of someone just pulling a deal like, how dare you ask for something? Especially something reasonable and realistic. If you're asking for crazy, like outrageous stuff, like a funny story is, like last week, I kind of gave a red line back, and the other lawyer's like, "Hey man, this is like a lot of stuff. Like we're not gonna get a deal done if like this is where you guys want. So if you can scale it back and make it, really focus on the most important things, we could get this done." So I went back with my client, we reevaluated, we honed in on the most important things, and we got the deal done. So it's like most of the time you're negotiating because you really want to do the deal, but you just need to feel confident, like you said, to ask for certain things that you feel strongly about. And if they say no, then like we said, sometimes you have to walk away. But, I don't think anyone is gonna completely like say, how dare you ask for that restriction? I don't want to work with you. Like maybe they'll say, okay, well, we can use it for 3 years. There's always a reasonable compromise. Like that's the truth of it. So I think that you should never be scared, whether it's with an attorney or whether it's on your own, to try to, request an edit or two. If you're gonna come back and destroy the whole thing and try to, change every word and everything, you might run into some problems, but
Yeah.
ultimately, little things here and there I don't think should be a problem.
Definitely. And in my experience, I haven't ever had somebody really have issues besides, like, okay, you're asking for too much here, right?
Yeah.
And then you kind of reel it back in, just like what you just said. Like, you can send over everything, and then most times people will be like, all right, you kind of asked for the entire ship here. I can't give that to you. Reel it in a little bit. And not only that, but typically if you're at a contract phase, there's already some kind of like verbal agreement, and you're just kind of working out the specifics of the agreement versus like, oh, here, first initial engagement, we had a 10-minute phone conversation, sign this contract. So it does favor, it's only favorable to people to have someone look it over, especially if it's something that could be long term or like a problem for you down the road if you don't. I'm lucky. I have a buddy who is in law, so he wrote my contracts for me that I'll send to people if I'm feeling the need for something like that, or they don't send one over. And it's just very helpful to have something in writing, and it covers my butt in case something were to go wrong. And there have been people that have said like, "Yo, this clause is not okay with us. We got to take that out because it is 100% a super beneficial contract to myself." But that's
Which it
what I'm going
should
to
be,
start with, right?
right? I think that's what I say. It's like, when you're negotiating with a team or someone, it's like their lawyers are doing their job, which is protecting them. So you need someone whose job it is to protect you and to make sure your interest is protected. And otherwise, hey, obviously I'm going to slant the agreement to protect me. Why wouldn't I? Like that's just good business.
100%. Um, and as far as like some basic aspects that we've kind of covered some, but is there anything else that you think like I'm the general person getting involved in these kind of agreements that I should know or that I should be on the lookout for?
I mean, I think that even more than that, you should just be aware with how you publicly communicate. I think a big thing I've noticed a lot with, especially people in the esports world is they don't realize that what they say on, social media, Twitch, Twitter on stream and chats, like there's always someone screenshotting something. Like and the internet is forever. And I think that people in this space don't really understand the impact of their statements, their, rash interactions, that they have lasting implications. And I think people in this space need to look at it in a much more professional way. They have to take it as such, like going to the internet and complaining about every little thing, like that's not really that professional. And I always kind of comment on it, and I don't like it when people are complaining at the developer and saying this game is hard, like and cursing out the game that makes your living. That's probably not the way to gain clout and respect with the developers who run everything. They're probably not going to favor you at all, and ultimately it's really unprofessional because what other brand is going to want to associate with someone who is going to act like that publicly about anything? You know what I mean? And I think one thing be that's like, yeah, obviously you want to approach this professionally from a business side, whether it's, trademarking, copyrights, LLCs and all that, but just from the way you carry yourself. There are a lot of brands that will not associate with people because of certain comments or certain things. Or we see people losing brand deal all the time because of a tweet they liked or retweeted or, just something. And I'm sure in hindsight they would love to unretweet that. I'm sure in hindsight, Nick Merckx would love that whole situation didn't happen, that he got removed from the Call of Duty game. Like we don't. He can say whatever he wants to say, but if he could have a time machine and go back, he would time machine and go back. So he didn't. You know what I mean? And it's just
Yeah.
like people don't realize this stuff. And the thing is, this stuff always surfaces at the worst time. When you're just about to blow up, just about to get that big deal, that random time you said something stupid on a Twitch stream, or replied to someone's Twitter 5 years ago because you were mad about something, it comes back
Yeah.
and
Well,
it all washes away. That's all she wrote, as they say.
when I think people don't realize how easy it is for like especially a big brand that has all the tools to quickly search something like this. Like if you tweet something, I mean there's tools out there. You could literally just put in search terms, find anything that this person said that could have been controversial. It'll auto populate with anything, and then if there's any red flags in there, it's like, okay, well, that's really easy on our behalf. We don't want to work with this person. So i I worked in sales and like a desk job for 4 or 5 years before doing all this, so very much do appreciate the like confirmation of please keep it professional. I try. I think I do a decent job of the way I portray myself, and I wish other people did that. But the thing that's difficult, especially from speaking with people, is if you've never had to do that and you've gotten away with being the way that you are constantly, right? Like, say you're 16, you blow up, you have a massive YouTube channel, you've never actually understood like proper communication, someone handles it for you that does everything. Like there's that disconnect, and hopefully over the next few years it gets better, because that what you just mentioned is one of my pet peeves. Not just like the way people portray themselves, but the way people act in meetings. And it is actually wild to me, some of the things and conversations that people think are okay to bring up in a professional workplace. And it's just like, I know we might be friends here, but like this is also work. You cannot say those things.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where sometimes you just like take the phone away, put the phone down, right? The best email or tweet is, again, sometimes the one you don't send, right? You write out the tweet, you're like, click delete. I always tell my clients, if you have something upset, whatever it is, Send the text message to me. Send the email to me. Like, that tweet that you wanted to send out because you're mad, send it to me. Okay. You got it out. Somebody else heard it. It's gone. Because the repercussions of one lapse in judgment, one just being too angry, taking things too seriously, letting your emotions get the best of you, and we're all human, we get it, but now you're putting yourself out as you're no longer just a regular person, right? It's like you are this public figure, right? In the law, they say you thrust yourself into the limelight. You stream, you content create, you compete, you cast, like you made yourself a public figure by what you're doing. So as a result, people are going to judge you based on what you do. And if you don't realize that, you know, it's going to be a rude awakening one day.
Yeah, you can't have it both ways. You can't have like your fame be the one thing that makes you successful in all your money, and then also have it not harm you when you do something wrong. Um, but there also is a fine line. I feel like recently people have kind of been going overboard with like the cancel culture nonsense, and some things are deserved, some things aren't. But I don't know. We'll see how that all handles itself, because I'm sure it will over the next few years. Now, when diving back a little bit more into your expertise for like red flags, what are some things where if I'm like I'm looking at a contract, what should set off an alarm in my head that I need to be careful, or I just shouldn't even think about working with a company?
I mean, I think it's one of those things where you kind of know it when you see it, where I think something that's very broad, very expansive, that just seems really unnecessary. Like I know I was doing a deal and it was like a one-off sponsored stream for a streamer, and it was like there was like a 6 month non-compete in there, and it was like this makes no sense. Like you're doing a one-off stream for, a couple $1,000s. Like it's highly unnecessary for you to have such a long, let alone really a non-compete at all. So I just knocked it out, crossed it out at a red line, and they didn't say anything. I made a comment like it's probably unnecessary for him to have this, and they're like, we agree, and they just did it, and it was just kind of like that just didn't add up to me. So it's one of those things where, like, as you read through it, you kind of notice things that you think are a bit too aggressive. Obviously, the more you do this, you kind of are familiar with what it should read. So once it doesn't read like that, you're like, oh, well, I've never had this situation, so why would it be like this now?
That makes sense. I think it's fairly easy when you've read a couple of contracts. I think for the most part, though, seeing something for the first time, like getting your first legal agreement that you have to sign, can sometimes be overwhelming. Um, but that's also a great time to reach out to someone like yourself or another lawyer. If you got a family friend who's a lawyer, maybe ask them, or a parent or something where
Well, well, I'll give the caveat on that, and I think it's one of those things where someone who is in the entertainment, sports, like these entertainment worlds, just because you're a lawyer, maybe just because you're a business lawyer, contract lawyer, you don't necessarily have maybe the specialty or the familiarity with some of this stuff. It might not be really that familiar. You might not understand the way streaming or royalties or in music, the music licensing comes where you have the two copyrights. So I always kind of caution people on just using a lawyer who's a lawyer, because there is a reason why people have these specialties. There is a reason why, I do, record deals and publishing deals and licensing deals and sponsorship and, team. And it's like these are specialized deals. So once you're doing with the 100 Thieves and Optic and, Activision Blizzard and all these big companies, you start to understand the way the deals are structured, what should be in there, what's really unnecessary, or really like, oh well, I've never had this before, like it doesn't make sense. And usually they take that out because they know, like, I had a team and it was like so shady. I hated it. They were like, oh well, we're gonna recoup the money we spend for your tournaments from the winning. So the hotels, the flights, the food that we're gonna pay, if you win, we're just gonna take that money out of it. And I'm like, I've never ever had that. Like I've done deals for 8 years already. Never once would a team do that. So I fought back on it. Like, okay, you're right. They took it out. But let me tell you, the other two kids on the team that didn't have me as their lawyer, I guarantee you their contract had that clause in there. So it just kind of showed me that because I understood the space, I've done these deals before. It can be like, hey, the Phase Optic, Immortals, and all these other teams, CLG, G2, like they don't have this in there. Like this doesn't make any sense why you would. And they're like, okay, yeah, yeah, and they back off immediately. So it's there's where the specialty comes in and the expertise beyond just being a lawyer. So, obviously it's better to have that than no one,
Yeah.
but there is there is a reason why people specialize in different areas in the legal world.
Yeah, and I think that was more my point of like, if you're just going to sign something yourself, at least get a second person to look at it
Yeah.
versus like, if you're working out a year long, multi year contract, you should definitely have someone that has your best interest, understands what they're looking at. And that's actually wild. I've never heard of anything like that, of where a team is going to pay you to represent
This is like a
them.
tier one org. This is
Oof.
like a tier one major org that got major investors. I'm not gonna blow them up in a major tier one esport, like paying these kids six figures plus a year, and that was in there, and I was so confused. But again, we got rid of it and keep it moving.
Are there any other like stories like that of
Oh,
some absolute nonsense that has gone on when you're trying to reach an agreement with people in the space?
I mean, I think it's sometimes funny to see kind of how everyone acts. Like, there's one time really early on, I was, going through this deal with this PUBG player. We spent like 2+ hours on the phone, going through the whole 30-page agreement, telling him all the reasoning behind my red lines, da 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 da. We give it to the team. We don't hear from him Saturday. We're like, what's going on? Then we hear from him Sunday, like, hey man, like, so sorry. Like, I just signed the deal. Like, the team just wanted me to come, and like, that was that. And I was just like, what do you mean you just signed this deal? This deal was horrible. There were so many issues in it, and you understood them and you agreed, but like you still, and it just baffled me that I spent all this time, all this energy, and you literally just, it was for nothing. So it was just kind of really shocking because I've never experienced that before. Like I said, I've been in the entertainment industry for 20 years, been an attorney for over 10. So it's like I understand dealing with creative people, rappers, musicians, artists, like these are some crazy, quirky people. But I've never experienced that. But I think in terms of more fun stuff, I have a streamer I was working with, and she got a really big opportunity to really level up, and she was exploding. So I kind of went to the team she was, and she was signed to, and I knew that they were gonna get a lot of exposure from this. So I was like, hey, like she wants double to stay here. Like you're paying her this, but like we want double. Like whatever, just call the owner. I'm like, we need double, or like you're probably just gonna have to drop her, kind of thing. And they went back 2 hours later. No problem. Let's do it. And it was just kind of like halfway through her contract. We renegotiated an extension for 2 more years, got her a raise for the second year. And it was just like a move. And it was just kind of like I felt like it was right. I felt like we had a really good, again, leverage, where it was like she was about to blow up and they were going to kind of come along for the ride. And, you know, that was a good one.
Yeah, that sounds like it. That sounds like a great person to have in your corner. That's like, yo, just pay me double. And the I feel like most people understand value. And when there's value in something, it's not hard to negotiate for it. Although right now in esports is kind of scary. I would love to just like understand or learn your thoughts, not even understand exactly what's going on, but we keep hearing esports winter, everything's going to hell. And it kind of is that way. Like there's a lot of people that have gotten laid off. We just had the Epic Games layoffs yesterday. There's been a ton of other games, Activision Blizzard earlier this year, the Guard. I mean, we can name them all, but it
Every
seems
week,
like,
it seems like, right?
yeah, it seems like it's crumbling, yet there are still people being very successful in the space. So from like your perspective, I would just like to get an understanding of where you see this right now and kind of where you see where it's going.
I mean, I don't think it's the sky is falling the way the media portrays it. I think, yes, maybe the VC money and these insane figures that Forbes was, touting all over the place might not necessarily be as true to the actual value of everything. But I do think that, there's a something amazing here. I think it's really going to grow and explode. I see in the back your Garden State Esports, Pat, credentials. So I think that's where there's a lot of optimism in the future, the next generation, the 12 to 15 to 16-year olds, the kids that are really starting to grow up with watching other people gaming at a high level, gaming being a lot much more part of their day-to-day culture and life and not kind of stigmatized the same way it was when I grew up or, our parents or their parent. Like it's just a whole different world. So I think it's really just evolving. And that's kind of the way I look at it is that it's maybe not the Super Bowl crusher that everyone says it is, but do I think it's going to probably get there? Yeah, I do. I think colleges across the country will have huge tailgates the way they do for college football, and it's just going to be another thing for people to root for. And how long that takes, I don't know. But, you can go to any big live event and you can see thousands of people there. The energy's amazing. Like, that's esports, and that is, I think, what's always going to get bigger and continue to grow. And that's kind of got to be the focus, and then beyond that is looking at it as much more than just competitive gaming. To me, the E in esports is entertainment. That people turn to it for just entertainment. It's exciting. It's, you see passion and skill and, everything you look for in traditional sports. You see people competing at the highest level. You see them winning, them losing, the underdog, the upset, right? The rookie that came out of nowhere. All these great storylines all play out in League of Legends. So you have that unique stories. So I think it's just more familiarity, more cultural acceptance, more people just being like, obviously, I watch people game. Like coming from the traditional entertainment world, my first couple years was just explaining to like music people and mainstream brands and clothing companies and whatever, like what this is. Like, what do you mean kids get paid to play video games? Like what do you mean they're making thousands or millions of dollars and thousands of kids are watching it and all like I don't understand this. So that was kind of the first wave of this, right? So it's kind of like we're coming out of that phase of shock value. So as a result, you had this sticker price because all these people are learning about this huge thing that has hundreds of millions of viewers and is dominating Asia and Europe and Australia and Latin America, and it's just coming across everywhere. And you know, hype is hype, right? Like NFTs and all that stuff was the hype after that, and it's now that's the dirty word of the day, right? You might have to bleep that out.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, when money's cheap, it gets thrown around. Money's expensive now, and like that's why we see less investment and just throwing money at esports at anything that kind of hits one of those buzzwords is not going to be a way to create a sustainable business. And I feel like now the organizations, the companies that are left in the space are figuring that out and doing a better job of that. I mean, 100 Thieves to me is the perfect example of what a lot of these orgs should have done is pivot, create other brands, create businesses where you sell goods so that way you can use your branch to market it, but you're also getting value in return by selling goods for a profit. And like they have Juvie, they have their clothing, I think yeah,
They
they're
have the
working on a
keyboard
game.
company
Yeah, they
and
have
they have the high ground.
apparels, so or peripherals, and
Yeah.
it's just all of that that like comes together. I actually there was it was my friends recently. They're not big gamers, but they're like, "Why would you guys want to watch someone play video games?" I'm like, "Well, why would you want to watch someone play football? They're really good at it. Like, why would I not want to watch people that are really good at what they do?" Um, it's like, well, why don't you just play yourself? It's like, why don't you just go play a game of football yourself? Like, it's very easy for me to understand, but then there is still this stigma to a lot of people that it's like, ew, why would I do that? So as we get older, and as kids kind of grow up with it, I feel like 20 years from now, it'll be mainstream, where gaming maybe isn't at the level of the NFL unless something happens to the NFL, but there will be very much still this core
I mean, it'll
group
be
of.
number three. It'll be the NFL, the NBA, and then it'll be competitive gaming. What title it's going to be, I don't know. I use it as a widget. It's a placeholder. It doesn't matter what the game is. There will be people competing and watching people compete as a sport, and it will probably be more popular than baseball and certainly more popular than hockey or MLS will probably be.
You really think it'll be number three?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you look at the trends of the generation, like how many, like if you look at the stats of baseball fans, right? It's very much, dad and grandpa generation. And, if you look at NFL and NBA, it's much younger, skews a lot younger. So in theory, those people are going to be fans for the next X amount of years. And so I don't know if they'll, you can't quote me on it, but I would be shocked if it in 20 years from now it's not a thing, right? If I'm a betting man, I would bet that more likely it's going to be up there than non-existent.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think one of the things that I saw people doing, because I've seen some pitch decks that people threw at um, companies and brands trying to get money for esports, is consider all esports one thing. It's like, yeah, League of Legends gets 250,000 viewers, and then you're like a small streamer that does this like indie game trying to use those numbers. But I also think that people have kind of caught on to, like, you can't just clump all esports into one thing, and there will be, like, League of Legends will still be around. I'm interested to see how Counter-Strike 2 goes, because that is kind of like a staple as far as like the hardcore competitive fans. And then there's like Dota and all these other, well, I shouldn't say Dota as one, all the other ones, that's one of the mains. But then there's all these others like Fortnite, Smash, all the fighting games. They kind of all have
Rocket
like,
League.
yeah, these like niche fan bases. And I'm interested to see if they can grow to the level of anything else with time, or it's just like this is the best it's ever going to be.
I mean, I think that, with, a lot of the fighting game stuff, it's very release based. So it's like it's fun when the new game comes out and in the series everyone plays it for a while and then it kind of dies. I was like, what happens when Riot Games just stops and wants to make League of Legends 2? Like when it's like, okay, guys, we're done with League of Legends, it's time for us to make League of Legends 2. And know with StarCraft and StarCraft 2, that was a huge kind of thing in esports history. It was like StarCraft was a huge game. It was, took the world by storm. You had PC bangs and, all the stuff you can read about in my book, hashtag ad. And then you kind of had StarCraft 2, and it was like a new game and knew this and knew that. And a lot of the StarCraft players were hesitant to play it because, they were used to this other game and now there's this new game. And it took a while for it to catch on. And then it obviously exploded and became, one of the hugest games ever, especially in esports world. But no one really talks about StarCraft 2 anymore as an esport, right? It kind of exists, but it's not in the breadth that you mentioned, and it's probably not in, the Rocket League, Free Fire, like, mobile game, PUBG, kind of Call of Duty, some Halo, like kind of some of these secondary titles that exist.
Yeah, I think that's also a huge barrier to keeping this steady fan base, is games develop and new games come out and then they die off as well, and it makes it much more difficult to create this like long historic rise of a player, a team, whatever it may be, where you gotta kind of jump at times and pivot, and it will push some fans away when you do different things. And also at the same time, you know, the developers have way too much control in this space, where your Call of Duty, you put out a shitty game, well, now you have to play COD League in my shitty game, and even though the other one was like not, inarguably better than the one we just put out. So it's interesting that there's so many parallels I see with sports, and then there's so many ones that aren't even close. And I call it developer problem, but also like they're the ones creating these awesome games, so like they're not necessarily a problem, but the amount of power they have, I think, is the problem in the space, because no matter what anyone wants to do, ultimately they can do whatever the hell they want and ruin or make things as they please.
Well, yeah, it's their game and they own it, so they can do what they want. But I think, my prophecy is there's eventually going to be 20 to 25 global esports orgs that all, you'll have the 100 Thieves, the FaZe, the Optic, Gen G and T1 and just some of these really ones. And they'll just field teams in whatever the game is of choice at that point. And it'll just be more, I always kind of look at it as less the sports and more the music world, where you have, Rockefeller and Cash Money and, Atlantic Records and Arista, and it's like kind of a cool thing to be associated with these people, do events with them, and like you're saying, to become much more of just a media company in the gaming space who has these, maybe you have the competitive players and but that's not all you're doing. That's not your sole focus, and it's just one vertical in a bigger business. I love the orgs that have started record labels like G2 launch your own record label. I thought that's ingenious. Not only do you now have a new vertical, you can get all this original music that you can monetize on the back end. Your streamers and content creators can use it in their videos, so you can make that money there. And you're now being able to add a new cultural way for you can do a music and gaming festival. And there's just so many things, like you said, where you're not at the publisher's control, where you're just using your brand, your coolness, your influencers to do something. And that's where you can really make money, where it's not based on the game. The fact that you game is kind of part of the conversation, but that's kind of where it ends, right? It's
Yeah,
more of like we're going to the 100 Thieves Cash compound to have live music and to hear artists we never heard of, and it's an album release party. It's like there's so many different avenues, and that's where I hope it goes. And like you said, you're starting to see some organizations catching on and seeing that's probably the way to do this.
that's cool. I honestly didn't even know that G2 started their own record label. How how recently is that?
Maybe it was a year-ish ago.
Okay.
Esports Insider and all these people put out so many articles. It's, because I teach all these classes, like one of the classes is kind of like more of like an advanced esports. So I look at, the intersection of music and esports and gaming and sports and esports and movies and TV and kind of just all of these new trends that we're seeing. So, you know,
That's cool. And you mentioned your book. What
yes.
is it called? And what's the value of the reader picking it up?
Um, so I wrote the first esports business law book, which is the essential guide to the business and law of esports and professional video gaming. You can get it on Amazon or anywhere else. And realistically, it was meant to really lay out and give, anyone, whether it's, a student, a professional, someone like you, another attorney. Like there's so many attorneys like, oh, I read your book and now I'm an esports lawyer. Like it was so helpful or this or that. And it was really meant to give you like a good cross reference to understand what's going on here. I have a really good chapter on contracts where I go through a model player contract and a coach and a caster and give you some ideas on different negotiation tactics, things you should look for. And then we look at copyrights and trademarks and how that's beneficial and tax write-offs and business structures and hashtag ad and FTC disclose like there's so many little things that go into it. So I really wanted to be one of those things where you kind of like read it from front to back and just learn a ton of stuff. And whether you're in the industry or you're starting just really trying to learn, it'll really give you a good understanding. And it's very structured on the business side, understanding how everyone makes money, the different revenue streams that are available. And, to me, that's what's important.
What was it like writing a book? Did you write it fully yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things, COVID happened and it's like, what do you do? Okay, well, it was really like I was working on another book and then I was like, okay, maybe I'm gonna do all these different articles and like all these different topics. So I was like, why don't I just write a book? And I just literally opened up a Microsoft Word document and just started writing. And, as you're writing, you're thinking of new topics, and it's just started to evolve. And, a year later, 300 300 pages. And, you know, then I pitched for a book deal and I got a publishing deal. And that was really cool. And, then you have the whole editor process, which takes, another 6 months. And the book came out, and, now I use it for teaching, and it's really cool.
Nice. That's interesting. I've always wanted to write a book. Probably too early in my career to really be as
Hey,
good as
man,
what?
go for it.
Uh, I don't know. I feel like I have some stories that I would love to share one day, but I also um I don't know that it's a book's worth. So later down the road, maybe when I'm like 35, 40 years old, that'll be the time where I sit down. Hopefully I still remember everything. I've written some of it down. There's some stuff where it's just like, what the hell was I thinking at the time? And I don't know, it's fun. I feel like it would be an interesting story for some people. Um, but I was curious just about like the whole process. And didn't have anyone, you wrote the book before you got the book deal?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much, was writing it, and then I probably had, like, a pitch kind of thing. I probably had like the first two chapters and like table of contents kind of thing, and I was sending that around, and it was like pretty much. But I just knew that like having a finished manuscript was the move, because then if they're, oh, this is interesting, it's okay, cool, I can get you this quick. Because otherwise, usually they would do a deal, and then it's like, okay, we have 6 months or however much to deliver it, and it was like, no, I want to move way quicker on that. So, it was great though, and it definitely is. I'm working on the second edition now. Just want to keep it steady and moving, and there's been so much stuff that's happened that I want to continue to make it longer and more expansive.
Yeah, I can imagine just as time goes on, there's only so much more, or there's so much more that you can continue to add on a regular basis. Almost every
Yeah, I
day
have
it
like
seems.
100 pages of notes of more stuff to add. Which is like over the years, I've just been like, okay, I want to put this on with this article, like just like a running tab. And obviously as I'm doing more deals and more consistency, I'm learning new things, and it's just becoming even, like I said, like just more robust.
Awesome, awesome. Um, any other stories you want to share before we get out of here?
Yeah, I mean, I always thought this was fun one was, actually have like a three-way bidding war for this Warzone player where, we were negotiating with a team. They were kind of taking a really long time to get back to us with the updated deal. And, then I started to talk to another team about a different player, and they were like, oh, well, you also have this guy, like what's his deal? And I'm like, oh, well, we're talking to this other team who's like, oh, well, we want him. We offered, we'll offer this. And it was a lot, it was a much more substantial offer than the other team. So I was like, okay, like I kind of went back to them. I'm like, hey, like this is kind of what another team is offering. Like, are you able to match it? And they're like, oh, well, we've had this happen before. We don't believe you. People always come back at the end and say they have this mysterious deal to get more money. And it was like, hey, man, like that's not how I am. Like, that's just not my MO, but whatever. And then at the same time, a third team is like, oh, we're looking to sign some players. Like, what do you think? And they kind of were like, kind of submitted an offer, and we kind of had these three teams all kind of vying for him. And, we ended up obviously going with the best deal that made the most sense. And it was just really interesting that, like, realistically, if this other team would have gotten us the deal back in, pretty reasonable time, he would have been signed to that team. He would have gotten way less money, and it would have just been that. But because they took so long, not only did they lose out on the player, but he got a much, much better deal elsewhere, and you know,
It's actually the
worked for
second.
me, right? Right? It
Yeah.
was cool though because it was like, like to have someone that's like really a hotly contested property, and to actually the same way in the NFL where the top free agent, like all the teams fly out to him and bring. Right, I saw a clip where when the Warriors and everyone was trying to court Kevin Durant in his first free agency, the Celtics flew out Tom Brady to the mansion to the Hamptons to talk to him and to tell him what being a star in Boston is like. It's like, Probably wasn't cheap to get Tom Brady to come fly in the on the week summer and the weekend to talk to Kevin Durant.
Nah, definitely not. But that is cool. That's an interesting story. I've definitely seen orgs fumble the bag like that as well. Where a player fully plans to sign with somebody, they take way longer than it should to get a contract returned, and then it winds up going with somebody else. So that's interesting. Well, Justin, let's wrap it up there. Tell everyone where they can find you, where they could get your services if they are interested, and anything else you'd like to shout out.
Well, yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was great. And everyone make sure to check me out on Twitter, Justin JESQ, or Instagram, or check my website, JMJESQ. I have lots of articles and my email and links to my book. So my DMs are open. I'm, happy to speak to anyone that has any questions.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Justin. I really appreciate the insights. I appreciate you taking the time. I'm sure you're a busy man, so taking an hour out of your day to sit here and answer my questions is very valuable to me, and I hope is valuable to a lot of people that get to listen. If you are at home and you appreciated this, go give him a follow or check out his website. You can find it. It is jmjesq.com. If you want to hit him up for services, would very much recommend it. But thank you everyone for listening, and we will see you next time. Peace.